In a world obsessed with numbers and metrics, what happens when loyalty becomes a liability? This isn't just a story about corporate betrayal, it's about what we lose when we forget the human side of business. Today, you'll follow a seasoned executive, discarded not because he failed, but because he became too experienced, too expensive, and too irreplaceable. But instead of revenge, he chose resilience. Instead of collapsing, he chose clarity. And what happened next didn't just change his life, it turned an entire industry on its head. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you're too old for this game, this story is for you. Stay with us. Because behind every layoff, every handshake, every thank you for your service, there's a deeper truth. Let's unmask it. The shock of being replaced, when loyalty becomes a budget burden. We need younger talent who'll work for half your salary. That sentence rang out clearly across the cold surface of the glass conference table. Troy, the new regional director, didn't sugarcoat it. To him, I wasn't an asset anymore, I was an expense. And an expensive one at that. My name is Sean Whitaker. I'm 50 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've led client relations at Trivanta Corp in Phoenix, Arizona. Every call I made, every handshake I offered, every deal I closed helped grow a modest business into a respected name in the industry. And it all ended in a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't entirely surprised. The warning signs had been appearing ever since Troy took over. There were murmurs of restructuring, cost optimization, modernization. Buzzwords that sound harmless, until you realize they mean experienced people are about to be replaced. Troy was 34, sharply dressed, fluent in corporate speak, and treated disruption like it was some trendy product. In meetings, his eyes would glance over me with restrained impatience, as if I were a landline phone in a room full of smartphones. Still functional, but outdated. The market's shifting, he continued. Not looking up from my personnel file. We need people who get social media, who can engage digital natives. You know how it is, right? I did know. But I didn't agree. I had built trust in ways no algorithm could measure. I didn't just do the job, I lived inside the relationships I'd spent years cultivating. Looking back, relationships as an irreplaceable life asset. I walked out of that meeting room in silence. No protests, no arguments, no visible resentment. But inside, I wasn't hollow. I was remembering. The calls. The promises. The people. I'd joined Trivanta, then called Western Business Solutions, back when it was just 3 employees, a windowless office. And more ambition than clients. Back then, Harold Thompson was the director, a man who believed that business was built on relationships, not transactions. He used to say, people sign contracts with people, not companies. I lived by that principle for 15 years. I was the first person clients called when something went wrong. And the last person they spoke to before renewing a contract. My personal contact book was thicker than the company's directory. IKN. EW, which college James's son had graduated from, what kind of flowers Catherine's wife liked on her birthday. No one taught me that. I learned it by listening. But it came at a cost. My marriage ended 8 years ago, partly because I put the company before my family. My daughter, Jessica, was in high school then. She got used to seeing me only on weekends and holidays. The day I got fired, Jessica was the first person I called. They did what? She shouted over the phone. After everything you've done for them? It's just business. I said calmly. I wasn't angry. I was already thinking about what came next. While Troy was buried in salary spreadsheets, I was remembering conversations, moments of trust. Times when I stood beside clients through their storms. Because they never called the company. They called me quiet preparation, moving forward without bitterness. I didn't leave the company with anger in my chest. What I carried instead was focus, as if some part of me had been quietly preparing for this moment all along. Maybe it wasn't an end. Maybe it was just a transition I had long seen coming. I didn't open the company CRM. I didn't download a single file. I didn't need to. The most valuable information was already mine, hundreds of handwritten notes, mental snapshots, and stories I had never forgotten. The kind of data no system could replicate. 3 weeks before I was let go, I had passed by a conference room and overheard Troy speaking with HR. Legacy staff compensation is no longer aligned with industry benchmarks, he said, especially in client relations. That was the moment I knew. To them, I was legacy staff, kept around for history, not value. Back at my desk, I opened my personal contact list. Not to retaliate, but to remember who I was. I saw Daniel Blake's name, an old colleague who had left 5 years earlier to join a promising rival firm. We'd kept in touch, grabbing lunch every few months. I called him. "How's Lennox and Blake treating you?" I asked. "Growing fast," he replied. "We're actually talking about expanding the client relations team." I smiled. "That's good to know." I didn't say more. No need to rush. The day Troy called me into his office to end my employment, the offer letter from Lennox and Blake was already sitting in my inbox. I was ready. Not for revenge. For my next chapter, on my terms. Clients don't choose companies, they choose people who listen. 3 days after leaving the company, I sat in my car in the parking lot of Crestwick Golf Club. Across the lot, Troy stepped out of a sleek SUV, adjusting his tie and greeting his guest, James, my biggest client for the past decade. I recognized what was happening instantly. Troy wasn't just replacing me on paper. He was trying to step into the relationships I had spent years building. Every handshake, every business lunch, every after-hours meeting, he thought he could replace it all with polished confidence and a few trendy buzzwords. But I didn't feel angry. That emotion had passed. What I felt was clarity, a cold, sharp realization. He didn't understand that trust isn't something you can transfer like a file. I drove straight to Lennox and Blake's downtown office. Daniel was a little surprised to see me. "I thought you were taking time to think things through," he said. "I don't need more time," I replied. "But I do want to revise the terms." In the conference room, I laid out my conditions. Full control over client onboarding. The ability to build my own team. And most importantly, no legal barriers preventing me from engaging with former clients, so long as they came to me willingly. Patricia Lennox herself entered the room. After listening, she studied me quietly. "You're essentially asking to bring your entire client base with you," she said. "I'm not taking anything," I replied. "I'm continuing the work I already started. The contracts may belong to Trivanta. But the trust, that's mine." She nodded. "If you can make it happen, the deal is yours." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table alone. No bitterness. No smugness. Just calm focus. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to keep my promises. A quiet departure, and the first wave of clients begins to leave. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a pen in hand. Not to draft a battle plan, but to make a list. Not of companies, of people. The ones who had called me at midnight when a production line failed, or the ones I'd sent flowers to when they lost someone they loved. I didn't reach out to them directly. I emailed their assistants, the quiet gatekeepers of every executive's world. My message was simple. I've moved to a new position. If your boss would like an update, I'd be happy to connect. No pressure. No pitches. No persuasion. Just honest communication. By midnight, 7 out of 10 had replied. All with the same sentiment. They want to hear from you. The next morning, I called James directly, no assistant buffer. Sean. He said the moment he answered. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. This isn't a sales call, I said. I've left Trivanta. I'm with Lennox and Blake now. Send over the paperwork. He replied without hesitation. We're following you. Within a week, 6 more clients had left Trivanta. No one was pushed. I simply showed up, when they needed someone who remembered their daughter's name, their allergy to onions, or that late-night call when the wrong version of a contract got printed. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt validated. That I had done the work right. And the people I served remembered that. Cracks beneath the surface, when the old guard knows the company better than its leader. I expected Troy to react. What I didn't expect was how fast, and how clumsily, he'd do it. Just 3 days after the client departures began, an email appeared in my inbox with the subject, cease and desist. Corporate language for one thing, panic. I opened it. As predicted. Accusations of client interference, misappropriation of proprietary data, threats of legal action if I didn't cease any behavior detrimental to the company. At the end, Troy suggested we meet privately to resolve this before it escalates. I didn't get angry. I just printed the email and walked it over to Daniel's office. Take a look, I said, placing it on his desk. Daniel scanned it and gave a dry smile. He's unraveling. The board must be breathing down his neck. He thinks I stole something, I said. But the only thing I took with me, was trust. And to him. That's worthless. That, I realized, was the fatal gap in his thinking. Trust isn't transferable. It's earned, over time, through effort, and Troy had no idea what it took. That afternoon, I got a call from Lisa, still at Trivanta, still loyal in ways they didn't deserve. You doing okay? She asked quietly, like someone might be listening. Better than expected, I replied. I had to warn you. It's chaos here. Troy told the board you hacked the CRM and stole the client list. I laughed. Lisa, you know I've never even logged in. Exactly. They've brought in an external audit team. Once they find nothing, and they won't, he's got no cover left. I thanked her. And felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not vengeance. Regret. Regret for people like Lisa, dedicated, overlooked, stuck inside a system collapsing under the weight of misplaced trust. They bet on spreadsheets and forgot that humans don't live in rows and columns. Troy thought leadership meant cutting costs, streamlining operations. But he overlooked the only thing that keeps clients loyal, personal connection. He didn't know that for 15 years, I hadn't just signed contracts. I remembered their children's names. I knew their anniversaries. I returned their calls, on Saturdays, if they left a rushed voicemail. I lived inside those relationships. He only looked at the expense column. As things began to fall apart, I didn't feel victorious. I simply saw the truth. Sometimes, you have to let a broken system collapse before anyone notices what was holding it up. Facing the man who discarded me, a lesson for the arrogant. That morning, I arrived at Copper Blues 15 minutes early. I chose a corner table, back to the wall, with a clear view of the entrance. Troy walked in at 9:05, as I expected, but the confidence he once wore like armor had faded. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his eyes restless. When he saw me, he forced a polite smile. But tension hung behind it. Thanks for coming, he said, sliding into the booth. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I didn't reply. I just looked at him. Waiting. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, I'll be direct. The board's under pressure. We've lost 7 major clients in a matter of days. I want to know, what will it take for this to stop? I took a slow sip of coffee. I don't want anything. I'm not coming back. He blinked, clearly thrown off. Then composed himself. Whatever Lennox is paying you. We can match it. Add a signing bonus too. I set my cup down and stared at him. You still don't get it, do you? This was never about money. Troy frowned. I could see the frustration rising. You can't deny that money runs everything. And that, I said calmly, is why you're losing. I leaned back in my seat. You think clients followed me because I offered better deals? They followed me because I remembered their children's birthdays. Because I returned calls at 10 p.m. Because I treated them like people, not assets. Troy stiffened. Touching. But practically, you're bleeding us dry. The board won't ignore this. I haven't stolen anyone. I replied. I told them I left. They chose what to do with that. Silence. Then he asked, softer now. What if I go back to the board and say you breached contract, took confidential data? I met his gaze. Then you'd be lying. And the audit will prove it. Troy flinched slightly. How do you know about the audit? I smiled. People talk to those they trust. That's what you never understood. His phone buzzed. He looked down, and in that brief moment, I saw it, panic. I have to take this, he said. Already rising. We're not finished. But as I watched him rush outside, I knew the truth. We were. When true value is recognized, the old company comes looking for the man they let go. That afternoon, just after wrapping up a meeting with a new client group, Daniel stepped into my office. Brows raised in disbelief. You just got a call from Harold Thompson, he said. He didn't leave a number. Said you'd remember it. I looked up. Not surprised. Did he say anything else? Daniel nodded. The board has called an emergency meeting. They want to talk to you, as soon as possible. I nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place, faster than I'd anticipated. That evening, I called Harold. He picked up after the first ring. They're in full panic. He said without a greeting. They just realized all 7 departing clients were yours. And they don't understand what's happening. I take it Troy didn't give them the full picture. No. He downplayed it. Called it temporary turbulence. I let out a quiet chuckle. What are you going to do? Harold asked directly. They want you back. Take Troy's job. Do whatever it takes to stop the bleeding. I wasn't surprised. But I wasn't eager either. I looked around my new office, it felt more right than the old one ever had. I'm not coming back, I said. But I do have a proposal. I laid it out. A partnership model between Trivanta and Lennox and Blake, shared client services for strategic accounts. Clients could choose their primary provider. But would benefit from both. Trivanta retains revenue instead of losing it. Lennox gains market share. No one has to be laid off. You want to save the company that threw you out? Harold asked. Both surprised and impressed. I want to do what's right, I replied. Not for them, for the clients. And for the employees caught in between. He was quiet for a moment. Then nodded. I'll present it to the board tomorrow. Anne. Troy will need to resign. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because deep down, I knew, I hadn't just proven my worth. I'd proven the worth of doing things the right way. Rebuilding through trust, not revenge, but a better way forward. The next morning, I invited Patricia Lennox into my office and walked her through the entire partnership proposal I'd shared with Harold. She listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. Her eyes fixed on me the entire time. When I finished, she closed her notebook and leaned back slightly. "To be honest, this is a very generous proposal," she said. "We could easily wait another month and let Trivanta collapse. Then we'd absorb their market share without giving up anything." I nodded. "I know. But if we do that, a lot of good people lose their jobs. Clients face disruption. Employees pay for one man's mistake. I'm not out for revenge. I'm looking for a way where both sides survive, with integrity." She paused. Then smiled. "You really aren't doing this out of spite." "I never was," I said. "Revenge is easy. Rebuilding through trust, that's harder. And far more meaningful." At 9:45 a.m. Harold called from the board meeting. "They've approved it," he said plainly. "Full partnership pending legal review. And Troy has been asked to resign." "What about the staff?" I asked. "No more layoffs," he confirmed. "The board admitted they got too caught up in cost-cutting and forgot the one thing that makes this business work: people." I hung up the phone. Not with triumph, but with relief. A quiet unburdening of something I hadn't realized I was carrying. That afternoon, Patricia returned to my office to finalize the preliminary agreement. She paused at the door, studying me. "In under 2 months, you've transformed 2 companies," she said. "Are you proud?" I shook my head. "Not proud. Just certain." In the end, I simply reminded everyone of something they already knew. Business isn't built on PowerPoint. It's built on trust. A fulfilling ending, rebuilding from the ground up with kindness and understanding. 6 weeks later, I stood at the podium in Lennox and Blake's conference hall, facing a packed room. Clients from both companies, board members, longtime staff, everyone was there. Behind me, the screen displayed a simple phrase: Strategic Partnership Announcement. Lennox and Blake times Trivanta. Troy was notably absent. Word was, he had accepted a position at a startup in Tucson, where cost-cutting might be better received. But here, today, something different was unfolding. "I'm not here to announce a merger," I began, scanning the familiar faces. "This isn't an acquisition. This isn't a conquest. It's a true partnership, built on the understanding that trust doesn't live in contracts. It lives in people." At the back of the room, I saw Harold smiling. Beside him sat Lisa and a few former Trivanta employees, people who, just weeks ago, were unsure about their futures. The partnership structure was simple yet elegant. Clients chose their primary firm but had access to both teams and services. Revenue would be shared based on usage. The client relations departments were merged, under my leadership. After the announcement, James, my longtime client, approached and gripped my hand firmly. "When you left Trivanta, I thought I'd follow you anywhere," he said. "But what you built, this is better than anything I imagined." Catherine joined us, nodding. That young man never understood what he threw away. But we did. Later that afternoon, Patricia found me by the conference room window, looking out over the city skyline. "The board is calling this a masterstroke," she said. "In 6 weeks, you've transformed an entire sector of their business." I shook my head. "I didn't do anything grand. I just reminded people that business is about human connection. Nothing more, nothing less." She squinted at me playfully. "And that's why they think you're a genius." I smiled. "If I'm a genius at anything, it's answering the phone on weekends." A quiet night, when old emotions return and the decision to let go. The night after the partnership announcement, I went home alone. The city outside my windows still shimmered with lights. But inside me was an unexpected stillness, like the waves I'd been riding for weeks had finally calmed. I brewed a cup of tea, stepped onto the balcony, and sat in silence. No urgent emails. No meetings to prepare for. Just me. And the questions I had put off for too long. I thought about the morning I was let go. About Troy's eyes, cold, impatient. But also youthful, confident, much like mine had been at 30. I had been angry with him. Angry for reducing me to a line item. Angry that what I built had been dismissed as excess cost. But tonight, in the quiet breeze and warmth of tea, I wasn't angry anymore. I realized something. Troy hadn't betrayed me. He just didn't understand who I was. And maybe he didn't understand himself either. I had been him once, young, driven, convinced that performance lived in spreadsheets and velocity. It took me years to understand that not everything valuable can be measured. And some things, like trust, take time to grow. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. The original Western Business Solutions team, me, Harold, Lisa, and 2 others. Each of us had once believed in something bigger than ourselves. I placed the frame on my desk. Then sat down, not to write a proposal or a pitch, but to write a note to myself. Forgiveness isn't about whether they deserve it. It's about whether I deserve peace. When I closed the notebook, I knew. My chapter with Trivanta, with Troy, was over. Not with a victory. But with understanding, and the choice to let go. Strength within, mastering oneself through unforeseen upheaval. People often ask me, weren't you angry? After everything they did to you? At first, that question gave me pause. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I had learned how not to let those feelings take the wheel. Anger is a natural response. But response is not the same as resilience. Resilience is when you're pushed into turmoil and still choose to stay grounded. No dramatic retaliation. No knee-jerk reaction. Just observation, quiet listening, and choosing the slow, steady path forward. When Troy fired me, I could have made noise. I knew I had the reputation and leverage to cause a stir. But I didn't. I said, I understand. I shook his hand. And I walked away. Because calm isn't weakness. It's a form of strength that starts from within. In the weeks that followed, as calls poured in, as decisions mounted, I didn't let myself spiral. I didn't vent online. I didn't point fingers. I sat down. Wrote my thoughts. Revisited old client notes. Listened to voicemail messages I'd saved. And I remembered who I was. Every morning, I walked the neighborhood. Not to escape stress, but to anchor myself in routine when everything else was shifting. Many nights, I sat in silence. Not strategizing. Just, being still. Letting every emotion surface, without resistance, without shame. Accepting that I was grieving. And growing. I used to think inner strength was something you were born with. I've since learned it's something you earn, one choice at a time. The choice to respond differently. The choice to hold your character firm, even when dismissed by others. And in the days when I was quietly erased, I quietly rebuilt, stronger, clearer, more grounded than ever before. What keeps us alive isn't the job, but the meaning behind it. I used to believe I lived for my job. For 15 years, I aligned every heartbeat with goals, contracts, and calendar alerts. I measured my days by the earliest email reply or the latest client call that stretched past 8 p.m. I called it dedication. But now, I realize, it was escape. Escape from the silence after logging off. Escape from distance in a crumbling marriage. Escape from the ache when my daughter said, "You're always busy." Work gave me structure. But it never gave me meaning. I didn't realize that the day I was fired. I realized it while calling clients, not to persuade them to follow me, but simply to keep my word. I had promised I'd always be there. And now, I still was. One night, after securing our first official partnership deal, my daughter Jessica called me over video. "You're living differently now," she said. "How so?" "Before, you lived to hold your place. Now, you live to hold your promises." Her words stayed with me. I no longer work for a title. Or to prove to anyone that I matter. I work because someone out there still needs me. Because I once promised I wouldn't disappear when things got hard. And because I need to know I'm living for something deeper than success. The truth is, your job can be taken away. Your salary. Your title. Your office. All of it, gone in an 8-minute meeting. But the meaning you create, when you help someone feel seen, supported, safe, that can never be stripped away. I've come to understand. What keeps us alive isn't where we work. It's why we show up every day, with kindness, with intention, and with our whole selves. Awakening after the fall, when loss leads you back to what truly matters. I used to think loss was the worst thing that could happen. But then I learned. Losing what you thought mattered most is often the only way to see what truly does. When I got fired, I believed I had lost everything, my career, my status, my reason to wake up in the morning. But step by step, choice by choice, call by honest call, I didn't just reclaim a position. I reclaimed who I was. One morning, when the dust had started to settle, I woke up before sunrise. Not because of alarms. Not from anxiety. Something within me had stirred, quiet, but insistent. I walked out to my porch and sat in my old wooden chair. The sky hadn't yet turned. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like anything was missing. I didn't think about Troy. Or Trivanta. Or the boardroom glances that once diminished me. I thought only of what had never changed in 15 years. The honest calls. The people I supported without obligation. The relationships that were never built on metrics. I had traveled far, only to return to something simple I once believed without question. People sign contracts with people. Not with PowerPoint. Not with logos. I once built my career to be seen. But it was only in the moment when I had nothing left to protect that I truly saw myself, clearly, stripped of titles, unmasked. Each returning client wasn't just validation. It was a quiet reminder that the things we do with sincerity always come back, slowly, but surely. And I realized. The fall didn't break me. It simply washed away everything that wasn't essential, so that what was irreplaceable could finally rise. No one is outdated, only misunderstood. I've heard it countless times throughout my career. We need younger talent, more agile, quicker with trends. The subtext was always clear. You're getting old. I won't deny that I'm not as fast as I was at 30. But what youth brings in speed, age brings in depth. And what I offer isn't in my hands, it's in my mind, my empathy. My ability to see beyond this week's metrics. Troy looked at me and saw a landline in a room full of smartphones, still functional, but obsolete. He didn't understand that landlines never lose signal. And when everything else drops out, people call what's stable. Clients didn't return because I knew social media. They returned because I listened. Because I remembered their kids' names. Because I didn't send automated emails, I called. I showed up. Presence, not technology, builds trust. No one is truly outdated. We're simply labeled by people who haven't yet learned to see beyond a resume or a birthdate. And sometimes, it takes losing the old guy to realize that value isn't measured in age, it's measured in the depth of your commitment. I don't resent Troy. I feel sorry for him, for missing the chance to learn that lesson sooner. Because some lessons don't come from an MBA. They come from sitting with someone in a hospital room, signing a deal in the middle of grief, or hearing someone cry on the phone at midnight. What I've gained can't be taught in a 3-month course. It came from 15 years of stepping into people's real lives, and not walking away when things got hard. And if there's one thing I'd say to anyone who's ever been called outdated, it's this. You're not outdated. You're what people come back to when the world around them becomes too fast and too cold.